On a blistering afternoon, a hard-working delivery driver rushing to finish his route spotted a stranded family with a young child suffering from heat exhaustion. Despite his tight schedule, he rushed to their aid, offering them a ride. Little did he know, this act of kindness would spark a chain of events that would forever alter both his life and the lives of those he helped. Before we dive into the story, let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thoughts. The asphalt shimmered like a mirage in the Georgia heat, waves of hot air dancing above the pavement of the Circle K gas station on Veterans Parkway. James Johnson wiped the sweat from his brow as he stepped out of his weathered delivery truck, the metal door handle burning his palm even through his work gloves. At 28, James had the kind of weathered hands that told stories of honest labor, hands that had loaded countless boxes, changed flat tires in the rain, and tenderly braided his daughter's hair each morning. The familiar ache in his chest came as it always did when he thought about those quiet morning moments with Zara. "Daddy, you braid better than Mama used to," she'd said just last week, and the innocent words had hit him like a physical blow. 3 years later, and he still expected to turn around and see Keisha's bright smile, still reached for the phone to call her when something funny happened. The digital display on the gas pump read $4.89 per gallon, and Marcus calculated quickly in his head. $23 in his wallet. Enough for half a tank and maybe a cold drink for Zara when he picked her up from after-school care. His 7-year-old daughter had been asking for one of those fancy smoothies from the corner store, the kind with the cartoon characters on the label that cost 3 times what they should. But seeing her face light up when he surprised her with small treats, that was worth more than the extra dollars he didn't really have. Before leaving home that morning, Marcus had watched Zara pack her backpack with her usual care. Along with her homework folder and library books, she'd tucked in a small baggie of goldfish crackers and fruit snacks. "In case I get hungry, Daddy," she'd explained, though Marcus suspected she packed them more for sharing than eating. It was just her way, always prepared to take care of others. Marcus had been working for Coleman's delivery service for 3 years now, ever since he'd moved to Columbus from Atlanta. The pay wasn't much, but it was steady, and his supervisor Mr. Coleman appreciated Marcus's reliability. Never missed a day, never complained about the long hours, always treated customers with respect even when they didn't return the courtesy. Today's route had been particularly brutal, 17 stops in this heat, including a 40-pound generator that had to be carried up 3 flights of stairs to Mrs. Patterson's apartment. As he inserted his debit card and selected regular, Marcus's phone buzzed. A text from his sister, Zara's teacher, called. She needs new school supplies for the science project. Due tomorrow. Marcus sighed, doing the math again. School supplies weren't in this week's budget, but they'd have to be. Zara's education came first, always. The gas pump clicked off at $18, not quite half a tank, but it would have to do. Marcus was screwing the gas cap back on when he heard it, the sound of metal grinding against concrete, followed by a sharp cry of frustration. Across the parking lot, a white family stood next to a silver Honda Pilot, with steam pouring from under the hood. The woman, blonde and probably in her early 30s, was holding a crying toddler while gesturing helplessly at the engine. Her husband, a tall man in a business suit despite the heat, was on his phone, his voice carrying across the lot. "What do you mean the earliest you can get here is 2 hours? We've got a 3-year-old. James finished with his gas cap and stood watching for a moment, feeling that familiar internal tug of war. The temperature gauge on his truck read 96 degrees, and it was only mid-afternoon. Inside, a broken-down car with a small child in this heat could turn dangerous fast. He knew what heat exhaustion looked like, had seen it too many times growing up in Atlanta projects where air conditioning was a luxury most families couldn't afford. But he also knew the look on the woman's face when she glanced his way. The unconscious step backward, the protective tightening of her grip on her child. He'd seen it 1,000 times before, the wariness that came automatically when a young black man approached, especially when families were vulnerable. What would Keisha do? The question came unbidden, but he already knew the answer. Keisha would have been halfway across the parking lot by now, introducing herself and offering help with that warm smile that could put anyone at ease. "Baby," he could almost hear her voice, "you can't control how people see you walking up. But you can control how they feel about you walking away." After a moment of internal debate, James made his choice. He walked over slowly, approaching with his hands visible, a habit he'd learned growing up in Atlanta, where a young black man had to be careful about how he approached strangers, especially white families in distress. "Excuse me," he called out when he was still several feet away, his voice gentle but clear. "I couldn't help but notice you folks might need some help." The husband looked up from his phone, taking in James's work clothes and delivery truck uniform. His expression was guarded but not unfriendly, the look of a man trying to balance caution with desperation. The woman clutched her child a little tighter, which James noticed but didn't take personally. He'd seen that reaction before, understood it even when it stung. "Oh, thank you, but we've called for help," the man said, his tone polite but cautious. "Tow truck should be here eventually." James nodded, staying where he was, giving them space. 4 hours though, in this heat with the little one, he said gently. "That's a long time to wait. My truck's got good air conditioning, if you'd like somewhere cool to sit while you wait." The woman looked at her husband uncertainly. The toddler was red-faced and fussy, clearly uncomfortable in the heat. James could see the mother's distress, the way she kept shifting the child's weight, trying to shield him from the sun with her own body. "I'm James, by the way," he said, pulling out his work ID and showing it to them from a respectful distance. "I do deliveries all over Columbus. Been on this route for 3 years now." The husband stepped closer to read the ID, his posture relaxing slightly. "I'm David," he said. "This is my wife Sarah and our son Tyler." He glanced back at the steaming car with obvious frustration. "Engine just started making this awful noise about 5 miles back, and now it won't start at all. We were heading to Macon to visit Sarah's parents. They haven't seen Tyler in months." James could hear the strain in David's voice, the barely controlled panic of a father watching his plans fall apart while his child suffered in the heat. It was a feeling James knew intimately, the weight of being responsible for someone small and vulnerable in a world that didn't always cooperate. "Mind if I take a look?" James asked, already rolling up his sleeves. "I'm no mechanic, but I've picked up a thing or two over the years." Sarah finally spoke up, her voice tight with stress. "Tyler's been crying on and off for the past hour. The car's been running hot, but we thought we could make it to Macon." She paused, then added more quietly, "We don't really know what to do." There was something in her admission, the raw honesty of a mother at the end of her rope, that reminded James of himself in those first weeks after Keisha died. Lost, overwhelmed, trying to hold it together for his daughter while feeling completely out of his depth. "Let me see what I can do," James said, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who'd learned to solve problems one step at a time. James popped the Honda's hood and immediately spotted the problem. The radiator hose had a significant leak, and the coolant reservoir was nearly empty. Steam rose from the engine block, but the damage wasn't catastrophic, just bad enough to leave them stranded. "Well, I've got some good news and some not so good news," he said, wiping his hands on a shop rag from his truck. The gesture was automatic, practiced, the same movement he'd made countless times when fixing things around their old apartment while Keisha watched and offered commentary. "You always make that face when you're thinking through a problem," she used to say. "Like you're having a conversation with the broken thing, trying to understand what it needs." "Good news is, this isn't as bad as it could be," James continued, pushing the memory aside. "Not so good news is, your car isn't going anywhere today without some repair work." David's face fell, and James saw him run a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration that was so familiar it made James's chest tight. He'd done the same thing 100 times during Keisha's illness, when the doctors would deliver another piece of bad news, and he'd have to figure out how to hold everything together. "What exactly are we looking at?" David asked. "Radiator hose has sprung a leak. Lost most of your coolant. Even if I could patch it temporarily, which I might be able to, you'd need to let the engine cool down completely and keep adding coolant every 20 miles or so." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, Tyler still fussing against her shoulder. "We were supposed to be at my parents' house by now. They've been planning this visit for weeks, made Tyler's favorite dinner, bought new toys." Her voice cracked slightly. "My dad just retired, and this was going to be his first real weekend with his grandson in months." James watched her struggle to maintain composure, and something in her desperation resonated deep in his chest. It was the same feeling he'd had sitting in hospital waiting rooms, watching carefully laid plans crumble while trying to shield Zara from his own fear and uncertainty. He glanced at his watch. 4:30 p.m. Still plenty of time before pickup, but he could see this family was drowning in stress and options were running out fast. "Tell you what," he said carefully, weighing his words, "I've got the evening free after I pick up my daughter. If you can't get your car sorted today, I could possibly give you folks a ride to Macon. It's not fancy, but my truck's reliable and has good AC." The words hung in the air between them. James could see David and Sarah exchange glances, clearly torn between gratitude and the natural wariness of depending on a stranger. "That's incredibly generous," David said slowly, his cautious instincts clearly at war with his desperation. "But we don't really know you, and Macon's what, an hour and a half from here?" "About that," James confirmed, "and I understand your hesitation completely. You don't know me from Adam, and you've got your child to think about." He paused, remembering how protective he'd become of Zara after Keisha died, how every decision felt like it carried the weight of being her only remaining parent. "Tell you what, why don't you folks come sit in my truck where it's cool while we figure this out? I can give you references if that would help. People who can vouch that I'm not some random person with questionable intentions." Sarah looked at Tyler, who was getting more lethargic in the heat, his usual toddler energy sapped by the temperature. "References?" James nodded. "My supervisor, couple of regular customers, my daughter's teacher. People who can vouch that I'm just a working dad trying to help out another family in a tough spot." He could see the internal debate playing out on their faces. Sarah whispered something to David, her voice too low to hear, but James caught the word Tyler and saw the way she glanced at her son with the particular worry that only a mother could carry. Finally, David spoke up. "Okay, let us get Tyler cooled down first, then we can talk through the details." As they moved Tyler's car seat to James's truck and got the air conditioning running full blast, the little boy began to perk up almost immediately. His cheeks lost some of their dangerous flush, and he stopped the restless fussing that had marked the last hour. "Thank God," Sarah breathed, settling into the passenger seat with Tyler on her lap. "I was starting to get really scared." James understood that fear. He remembered the night Zara had spiked a fever of 104 degrees, how he'd sat in the emergency room holding her, feeling completely helpless and alone. The relief when the fever finally broke was something he'd never forget. "He's going to be fine," James said gently. "Kids bounce back fast once they're cool and comfortable." From the driver's seat, James called Mr. Coleman first, putting the phone on speaker so the family could hear. "Coleman here. Mr. Coleman, it's James. I'm here with a family whose car broke down, and they need some references. Mind if I put you on speaker?" "Sure thing, James. You folks having car trouble?" David leaned toward the phone. "Yes sir, your driver James offered to help us get to Macon, but we wanted to check his references first." Mr. Coleman's chuckle was warm and genuine. "Son, if James Johnson offered to help you, you just won the lottery. Most honest hard-working man I've employed in 30 years. Got a little girl he's raising on his own, works overtime whenever I need him, never complains about anything." He paused. "If he says he'll get you where you need to go safely, you can bank on it." James also called Mrs. Patterson, one of his regular delivery customers, who spoke glowingly of his reliability and character. "That man delivered my diabetes medication in the middle of an ice storm last winter," she told them. "Wouldn't take a tip either, said he was just doing his job." By the time they finished the calls, Sarah was visibly more relaxed, and even David seemed to have let go of some of his tension. "I'm sorry we had to do that," Sarah said quietly. "Ma'am, don't apologize for protecting your child," James replied, his voice carrying the conviction of someone who understood parental responsibility intimately. "Any good parent would do the same. I would have done the same." David was studying James thoughtfully. "Can I ask you something personal? Why would you go so far out of your way for complete strangers?" James considered the question as he watched Tyler, now comfortable in the cool air, playing with a small toy his mother had given him. The child's contentment stirred something in his chest, a memory of Zara at that age, the way she'd fall asleep in his lap after a day of adventures. "You know," James said finally, "I lost my wife 3 years ago, cancer. Since then it's been just me and my daughter." He paused, feeling the familiar tightness in his throat that came when he spoke about Keisha. Before she died, she made me promise something. She said, James, when you see someone who needs help, you help them. Because someday Zara might be the one who needs helping, and I want her to live in a world where people do that for each other. The truck fell silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and Tyler's quiet babbling. I'm so sorry, Sarah whispered, her eyes filling with tears. James met her gaze in the rearview mirror. Thank you, but the thing is, keeping that promise, it doesn't feel like a sacrifice. It feels like honoring her memory. It feels like teaching my daughter what kind of person I want her to be. What about your daughter? Sarah asked after a moment. Don't you need to pick her up soon? James smiled, the expression transforming his whole face. Not until 6:30. After school care stays open until 7, so we've got time to figure things out. He glanced at his watch. And honestly, Zara would never forgive me if I told her I met a family in trouble and didn't help them. She's got her mama's heart, always wanting to take care of everybody. Over the next hour, they exhausted every reasonable option. The local auto shop was backed up until late evening. The tow truck dispatcher pushed their arrival time back to 8 p.m., then called again to push it to 9. Car rental agencies were either closed for the day or had no vehicles available. During the wait, they talked. David mentioned that he worked in business, dealing with corporate matters, though he kept the details vague. Sarah talked about Tyler's excitement about seeing his grandparents, how he'd been asking, "Are we there yet?" every 10 minutes until the car started overheating. James found himself sharing more than he usually did with strangers, stories about Zara's precocious observations about the world, his struggles with single parenthood, the way grief could hit you at unexpected moments like a rogue wave. You know what strikes me, Sarah said during a lull in the conversation. You could have just looked at our car, told us you couldn't help, and gone on with your day. No one would have blamed you. James was quiet for a moment, watching a family at the gas pumps nearby, a father lifting his small daughter so she could reach the window cleaner, both of them laughing at something she'd said. My daddy used to say that we're all just walking each other home, he said finally. Some days you're the one who needs help, some days you're the one who can give it. Today I can give it, but you're taking on our problem, David pointed out. Our emergency becomes your responsibility. James turned to look at them both. See, that's where I think you're wrong. You're not a problem to be solved. You're people who need help, and helping people, that's not a burden. It's a privilege. The simple honesty of the statement hung in the air, and James saw something shift in both David and Sarah's expressions. You know what? David said finally, reaching for his wallet. If you're really willing to drive us to Macon, then we're going to do this right. Gas for a trip like that has to be $40–50 minimum. That's on us, obviously. I'd appreciate that, James said honestly. But I need to ask, are you really sure about this? It's a big leap of faith, trusting a stranger with your family. David looked at his wife, then at Tyler, who had been quietly playing and was now smiling at something he saw out the window. You know what? Sometimes you have to trust in people's basic goodness, and everything about you tells us you're good people. Sarah nodded. Besides, Tyler seems to like you. That's not always easy to achieve. James felt something warm expand in his chest, not just gratitude, but recognition. These people were choosing to trust him, to see him as someone worthy of that trust. It was a gift he didn't take lightly. All right then, he said, starting the truck. Let's go collect my daughter and get you folks to Macon. With the plan settled, James headed toward his final scheduled delivery while David and Sarah stayed comfortable in the air-conditioned truck with Tyler. It was a routine stop, just an envelope to Henderson and Associates law firm on 3rd Avenue. James had made this same delivery dozens of times before, never paying much attention to the contents or questioning the firm's business. But as he pulled up to the brick building, something was different. A small group of people stood on the sidewalk holding signs, "Stop Unfair Evictions and Homes Not Profits." The crowd wasn't large, maybe 15 people, but their presence changed the entire atmosphere of the normally quiet street. James parked and grabbed the envelope, figuring he'd just walk through quickly and be done. He had a family depending on him, a daughter to pick up, and a long drive ahead. The last thing he needed was to get involved in someone else's problem. But as he approached the building entrance, an elderly black woman stepped forward. There was something in her bearing, a dignity mixed with weariness, that reminded him of his own grandmother. "Son, you work for Coleman's Delivery?" she asked, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "Yes, ma'am, just dropping off some papers." The woman's eyes fixed on the envelope in his hands. "You know what kind of papers you're carrying?" James looked down at the manila envelope, sealed and unremarkable. For 3 years he'd carried hundreds just like it, never questioning the contents. Legal documents were legal documents, not his business what they said. "Legal papers, I assume. That's what I usually deliver to law offices." The woman, who introduced herself as Mrs. Washington, explained that Henderson and Associates had been serving eviction notices to long-time residents of the neighborhood, many of whom had lived there for decades. "That envelope probably contains notices for the families on Elm Street," she said, her voice heavy with sadness. "Good people who've fallen behind on rent because their landlord jacked up prices by 40% in 6 months. James felt something cold settle in his stomach. In the truck behind him, a family was depending on his help, trusting his word. In his hand, he held papers that might destroy other families. The weight of the envelope seemed to increase tenfold. "Ma'am, I'm just the delivery guy," he said, though even as he spoke, the words felt hollow. "I don't make these decisions, I just deliver what I'm told to deliver." Mrs. Washington studied his face with the keen attention of someone who'd lived long enough to recognize character when she saw it. "I know that, honey, but now you know what you're carrying. Question is, what are you going to do about it?" James glanced back at his truck, where David and Sarah were visible through the windshield, waiting patiently. Tyler seemed to be sleeping now, finally comfortable after his ordeal in the heat. They were counting on him to handle his business so they could all get on the road. Sarah's parents were waiting, but he also thought about the families Mrs. Washington had mentioned. Families with children, maybe, who might be homeless by the end of the week. The smart thing would be to make the delivery and move on, keep his job, help the family in his truck, stay in his lane. That's what the old James would have done, the James who'd learned to keep his head down and avoid other people's problems. But something had shifted in him today. Helping David and Sarah, seeing their relief when Tyler cooled down in his truck, feeling useful in a way that went beyond just doing his job. It had awakened something he thought died with Keisha. "Can I ask you something, Mrs. Washington? Is there any legal help available for these families? Any way they can fight these evictions?" The old woman's expression softened slightly. "Son, legal help costs money these folks don't have. Most of them are working 2 jobs just to try to make rent at the old price." James felt a memory surface, sitting in a lawyer's office during Keisha's illness, watching the man's meter run while he explained what their insurance wouldn't cover. The helplessness of needing expert help, and not being able to afford it, was something he understood intimately. A sudden thought occurred to him. "Mrs. Washington, would you excuse me for just a minute? I need to talk to someone. Maybe I know someone who could help." He walked back to his truck, the envelope still in his hand. Through the passenger window, he could see that David was awake, reading something on his phone while Sarah dozed with Tyler in her arms. "David," James said quietly, "I need to ask you something and I need you to be straight with me." David looked up immediately, alert. "What's going on?" James explained the situation as clearly as he could: the protesters, the eviction notices, the families who couldn't afford legal representation. As he spoke, he watched David's expression change from mild interest to sharp attention. "These families," James concluded, "they need legal help but can't afford it. I know it's not your area, but you mentioned you work in business. Do you know anyone who might be able to help? Any lawyers who do this kind of work?" David was quiet for a long moment, and James could see him thinking, weighing something important. Finally he spoke. "James, I should have been more specific earlier. I'm not just in business, I'm an attorney. Corporate law, mainly mergers and acquisitions." He paused. "But you want to know something? I did housing law in law school. Wrote my senior thesis on predatory eviction practices." James felt his pulse quicken. "Would you be willing to take a look at some eviction cases? I mean, if there was a way." David was quiet for another moment. "James, are you asking me what I think you're asking me? I'm asking if you'd be willing to help some families who need a lawyer and can't afford one." Sarah had woken up during the conversation. "David," she said softly, "didn't you just tell me last month that you wanted to do more meaningful work?" David looked at his wife, then back at James. "You know what, yes, I would. But James, you understand what you're risking here. If you don't deliver that envelope, I could lose my job, James finished. Yeah, I know. The weight of the decision pressed down on him. His job wasn't just income, it was security for Zara, health insurance, the stability they'd built over 3 years. Losing it would mean starting over, and starting over with a 7-year-old depending on you was terrifying. But he thought about Keisha's words, about the promise he'd made to her. He thought about the kind of man he wanted Zara to see when she looked at her father. Mrs. Washington, he called, walking back toward the group. I've got an attorney here who might be able to help those families. But I need to ask you a favor. What's that, son? Can you give me until Monday to deliver this envelope? Maybe that'll buy some time for folks to get legal representation. Mrs. Washington's eyes widened. You willing to risk your job over this? James looked at the envelope in his hands, then back at the truck where a family was trusting him to help them, then at the faces of the protesters who were fighting for their neighbors' homes. Ma'am, I don't know if I'm willing to risk my job, he said honestly. But I am willing to try to do the right thing and hope it works out. The honesty of his answer seemed to resonate with the crowd. Mrs. Washington studied his face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, what do you need from us? After some discussion, they agreed that James would call his supervisor and request a delay in delivery due to safety concerns at the law office, which was technically true, given the crowd and the tension in the air. James's hands were shaking slightly as he dialed Mr. Coleman's number. 3 years of perfect service, and now he was about to bend the truth to protect people he'd never met. Coleman here, Mr. Coleman, it's James. I'm at the Henderson Law Office on 3rd Avenue, and there's a situation here. What kind of situation? James chose his words carefully. There's a crowd of protesters blocking access to the building. It doesn't feel safe to approach right now. Would it be possible to delay this delivery until Monday when things might be calmer? There was a pause. James held his breath. James, you've never given me trouble in 3 years. Mr. Coleman said finally, if you say there's a safety issue, I trust your judgment. Monday morning will be fine. Thank you, sir. I really appreciate it. Just be careful, son. And James, yes, sir. I'm proud of you for not taking risks when it comes to safety. That's good judgment. When James hung up, he realized his hands were still shaking. Mrs. Washington was watching him with something that looked like pride. That was brave, son. That was terrifying, James replied honestly. But it was also the right thing to do. As he walked back toward his truck, James felt something shift inside him. For 3 years, he'd delivered packages without thinking about their contents or consequences. Today, for the first time, he'd chosen to see the people behind the paperwork. David was waiting with questions, and James could see that something had changed in the lawyer's expression too, a sharpness, an engagement that hadn't been there before. So David said as James climbed back into the driver's seat, tell me everything you know about these eviction cases. By the time they collected Zara from after-school care, the truck had become a mobile strategy session. David had spent the drive asking detailed questions about the neighborhood, the families involved, and the landlord's practices. His corporate lawyer training was evident in the way he approached the problem, methodically, thoroughly, looking for weaknesses in the opposition's position. James had worried about how his daughter would react to strangers in their truck, but Zara took it all in stride with the adaptability that had helped her navigate life with a single father. Daddy, why does Tyler look sad? She asked after she'd been introduced to the family and climbed into the back seat. Their car broke down, baby girl. So we're giving them a ride to their hotel. Zara studied Tyler with the serious expression she wore when trying to solve problems. Hi Tyler. Do you like goldfish crackers? I have some, and I have a toy car that makes real sounds. Want to see? Within minutes, Tyler was giggling at Zara's animated demonstration of how the toy car worked, complete with sound effects and dramatic crashes. The tension in the truck eased considerably as they headed south on Interstate 185, the children's laughter providing a soundtrack to the adults' more serious conversation. Your daughter is wonderful, Sarah said to James, watching Zara patiently help Tyler operate the toy. She's got her mama's heart, James replied, and for once the mention of Keisha didn't bring the usual stab of pain. Instead, he felt something warm and proud, always wanting to take care of everybody. James found himself sharing more about Keisha as they drove, how she'd been a social worker, how she'd brought home stories about families in crisis, how she'd always seen helping others as not just her job but her calling. She used to say that kindness was like a muscle, James said, navigating the evening traffic. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. But if you don't exercise it, it atrophies. She sounds like she was an amazing woman, Sarah said softly. She was. She would have loved this, us helping each other, David using his law degree to help families keep their homes. She always said that the best part of being alive was making other people's lives a little easier. The conversation drifted to their own lives, their hopes and struggles. David talked about feeling disconnected from his work, how corporate law had started to feel meaningless despite its financial rewards. Sarah shared her own dreams of going back to school, maybe becoming a teacher. What made you want to be a lawyer? James asked during a quiet stretch of highway. Honestly, I wanted to help people. Sounds naive now, but I went to law school thinking I'd do civil rights work, maybe legal aid. David's voice carried a note of regret. But law school debt was crushing, and corporate law paid the bills. Somehow temporarily became permanently. It's never too late to change course, James said. I didn't become a delivery driver because it was my dream job. I became one because it was steady work that let me be home with Zara in the evenings. But today felt different. Today felt like maybe I could do something that mattered. As they drove through the Georgia countryside, past peach orchards and pine forests, James found himself opening up in ways he rarely did. He talked about the loneliness of single parenthood, the weight of being Zara's only source of security and stability. Some nights I lie awake terrified that something will happen to me, he admitted. Not because I'm afraid to die, but because I'm afraid of leaving her alone. She's already lost one parent. The thought of her losing both. Sarah reached over from the passenger seat and squeezed his shoulder. She won't lose you. And even if something did happen, look at what you're teaching her. You're showing her how to be brave, how to help others, how to do the right thing even when it's hard. That's what Keisha would have wanted, James said quietly. For Zara to grow up knowing that the world is full of good people who take care of each other. Tyler had fallen asleep against Zara's shoulder, and she was carefully adjusting her position so he'd be more comfortable. The gesture was so naturally caring, so unconsciously kind, that James felt his eyes fill with tears. She's going to be an amazing woman, David said, following James's gaze. She already is, James replied. They stopped for dinner at a small family restaurant outside Macon, and James watched his daughter and this family that had been strangers 12 hours ago interact like they'd known each other for years. Zara was patient with Tyler's toddler messiness. David asked her thoughtful questions about school, and Sarah helped her color a picture on the children's menu. For the first time since Keisha's death, James felt like Zara was part of something bigger than just the two of them. The ache of missing Keisha was still there, would probably always be there, but it was tempered now by gratitude for this unexpected connection. James, David said during dinner, I've been thinking about those eviction cases all day. I want to do more than just review them. I want to actually represent these families. But you're not licensed in Georgia, right? No, but I can work with a local attorney. I need to make some calls when we get back. He paused, looking thoughtful. You know what? I've been thinking about this backward. Instead of just attending business meetings and conferences, maybe I should start networking with attorneys who actually help people. James felt a spark of hope. You really think you could help them? I think we could help them, David corrected. This isn't just about legal representation, it's about community, about people looking out for each other. You're the one who connected me to these families. You're the one who took the risk. All I did was delay delivering an envelope. No, Sarah said firmly. You chose to see those families as people who mattered, not just obstacles to your schedule. That's huge, James. That changes everything. As they finished dinner and prepared for the final stretch to Macon, James realized that something fundamental had shifted in his understanding of himself and his place in the world. He'd started the day thinking of himself as just a delivery driver, someone who moved packages from point A to point B. But today had shown him that he could be something more, not just someone who delivered things, but someone who connected people, who saw needs and found ways to meet them. You know what's funny? James said as they loaded back into the truck. I used to think helping people meant sacrificing something, time, money, opportunities. But today, helping you folks, getting involved with those families facing eviction, I feel like I've gained more than I've given. How so? David asked. I feel useful in a way I haven't felt since Keisha died, like I'm honoring her memory by living the way she lived, seeing people who need help and finding ways to help them. The Georgia sun was setting behind them as they made the final approach to Macon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. In the back seat, both children were dozing, Tyler's head on Zara's shoulder, her arm protectively around him. They look like brother and sister, Sarah said softly. James smiled, thinking about how empty the truck would feel tomorrow when he drove home alone with just Zara. You know, if you folks ever find yourselves in Columbus again, you've got friends there. Actually, David said, I've been thinking about that too. Sarah and I have been talking about relocating somewhere with a lower cost of living, somewhere we could make a real difference in the community. You'd consider Columbus? After today, absolutely. In fact, I'm going to spend the next few weeks networking with attorneys who do housing law, seeing what opportunities exist in Georgia. James felt something hopeful and unexpected bloom in his chest. That would be incredible. Tyler would love it, Sarah added. He's never taken to someone as quickly as he has to Zara. As they pulled into the Hampton Inn parking lot, James realized that what had started as a simple act of helping strangers had become something much deeper, the beginning of connections that might change all their lives. The Hampton Inn in Macon was nothing fancy, but it felt like luxury to James. When David insisted on paying for 2 rooms, one for his family and one for James and Zara, James protested, but David was firm. You saved our day, probably our trip, David said as they stood in the lobby. This is the least we can do. Plus, Sarah added with a smile, Tyler would be heartbroken if Zara left right now. It was true. The children had become inseparable during the drive, and Tyler had asked twice if Zara could stay for breakfast in the morning. The hotel room was modest but clean, with 2 double beds and a small table by the window. As James helped Zara get ready for bed, she chattered excitedly about their new friends. Daddy, Tyler's really little, but he's smart. He knows all his colors and he can count to 20. That's pretty impressive for a 3-year-old. And Sarah showed me pictures on her phone of their house in South Carolina. They have a big backyard with a swing set. Zara paused in brushing her teeth. Do you think we'll see them again after tomorrow? James felt that familiar tightness in his chest that came when Zara asked questions he couldn't answer with certainty. Since Keisha's death, he'd learned to be honest with his daughter about uncertainty, but it never got easier. I hope so, baby girl. But even if we don't, we made some good friends today, and that's special all by itself. Zara nodded seriously. Mama used to say that every person we meet teaches us something. She did say that. James knelt down to Zara's level. What do you think Tyler and his parents taught us today? That sometimes scary things turn into good things, Zara said without hesitation. And that helping people makes you feel happy inside. James hugged his daughter tightly, amazed as always by her wisdom. That's exactly right, sweetheart. After Zara fell asleep, James found himself too restless to rest. He stepped out onto the small balcony overlooking the hotel's pool area, where a few late-evening swimmers were taking advantage of the cooler air. A soft knock on the adjoining door interrupted his thoughts. It was David, looking as wide awake as James felt. Mind if I join you? Sarah and Tyler are both out cold, but I can't seem to turn my brain off. I know the feeling, James said, gesturing to one of the plastic chairs. A lot to process from today. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the swimmers below and listening to the distant hum of highway traffic. James, David said eventually, can I tell you something that might sound crazy? After today, I'm pretty sure nothing would sound crazy. Today was the first day in probably 5 years that I felt like my law degree actually mattered for something good. David's voice was quiet, but intense. I mean, I've been successful by most measures, good salary, nice house, respect in my field. But today, thinking about those families facing eviction, knowing I might actually be able to help them, that felt more important than any corporate deal I've ever closed. James nodded. I get that. Today felt different for me too. Like maybe there's more I could be doing with my life than just moving packages around. What would you want to do, if you could do anything? James considered the question seriously. You know, I've always been good at connecting with people, figuring out what they need. Today, seeing how Mrs. Washington trusted me enough to share her neighbor's problems, how you and Sarah came to trust me with your family, maybe there's something there. Maybe I could be the kind of person who helps connect people who need help with people who can provide it. Like community organizing, maybe, or social work, like Keisha did. She always said the hardest part of her job wasn't the casework, it was helping people navigate all the different systems and agencies, finding the right lawyer, the right support services, the right resources. David was quiet for a moment. What if I told you I've been thinking about starting a non-profit? Something focused on housing advocacy, connecting families with legal aid, preventing predatory evictions. James felt his heart skip. I'd say that sounds like exactly the kind of work that could change people's lives. The thing is, I know the legal side, but I don't know the community side. I don't know how to build trust with families like the ones Mrs. Washington was talking about. David turned to look at James directly. But you do. You walked into that situation today, and immediately earned their respect. That's not a skill you can learn in law school. You're talking about a partnership. I'm talking about doing something that matters, together. James felt a surge of possibility that he hadn't experienced since before Keisha got sick. What would that look like practically? Well, first I need to get through the next few weeks, see what kind of local support I can drum up for those immediate eviction cases. But long term, I've been thinking about this all evening. We could start small, maybe a legal clinic, office hours where people could come get advice about housing issues. You could be the community liaison, the person who builds relationships and helps people feel comfortable seeking help. The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. James thought about the stability his current job provided, the health insurance, the predictable schedule that worked with Zara's school. David, that sounds incredible, but I've got to be realistic. I've got a daughter to support, bills to pay. I can't just walk away from steady work on the hope that something better might work out. Of course not, I wouldn't ask you to do that. David leaned forward in his chair. But what if it wasn't hope? What if it was a real plan with real funding? How do you mean? I've got savings. Sarah and I have talked about this before. We've been fortunate financially, and we've always wanted to use some of that to make a difference. Starting a non-profit, paying you a real salary with benefits while we build it up, that's not just possible, it's something we actively want to do. James felt overwhelmed. David, you barely know me. How can you be sure I'm the right person for something like this? Because of everything I've seen today, the way you approached our family when we were in crisis, respectful, helpful, but not pushy. The way you handled that situation with the protesters, you listened, you cared, but you also thought strategically about how to help. The way you talk about your daughter, your wife's memory, your community. David paused, and honestly, because Mrs. Washington trusted you, that woman has probably seen every kind of person there is. If she saw something in you worth trusting, that's good enough for me. A memory surfaced, Keisha in the hospital during one of her better days, talking about her dreams for the future even as they both knew her time was running out. Baby, promise me something, she'd said. When the opportunity comes to do something bigger, something that could really help people, don't let fear hold you back. You've got gifts, James, don't waste them playing it safe. I'd need to think about it, James said finally. Talk it over with Zara, make sure the timing would work for our family. Of course, but James, just promise me you'll really consider it. Not just the risks but the possibilities. James looked out at the pool below, where a young father was teaching his daughter to swim, supporting her with gentle hands as she kicked her legs and laughed with delight. The scene reminded him of himself with Zara at the community pool last summer, the way her face had lit up when she'd finally managed to float on her back without his help. I promise, he said. I'll really consider it. They talked for another hour about practicalities, what such a non-profit might look like, how they could structure it to serve the community most effectively, what James's role might involve. By the time they said goodnight, James felt like he was standing at the edge of a cliff, looking out at a view he'd never imagined possible.
Back inside the hotel room, he sat in the chair by the window and watched Zara sleep. She lay on her side, one arm wrapped around the small stuffed elephant that had been her comfort object since Keisha died. In sleep she looked so young, so vulnerable, and James felt the familiar weight of being responsible for her future. But he also felt something else, excitement about the possibility of showing her a different kind of life, one where work wasn't just about paying bills but about making a difference. The kind of life Keisha would have been proud to see them living. "What do you think, Keisha?" he whispered into the quiet room. "Are we ready for something bigger?" He could almost hear her response, feel her gentle encouragement. "Baby, you've been ready, you just needed to believe it." The next month passed in a blur of phone calls, meetings and possibilities that James had never imagined. David had spent his time networking with unprecedented purpose, and the results exceeded everyone's expectations. By the second week, he had connected with 3 Georgia attorneys willing to take the Elm Street eviction cases pro bono. By the end of the month, those same attorneys had identified multiple legal violations in the eviction proceedings: improper notice periods, discriminatory rent increases, and failure to follow state-mandated procedures. James's phone rang on a Thursday evening as he was helping Zara with her volcano project. "James, you're not going to believe this." David's voice was electric with excitement. "We got an emergency injunction. All the evictions are on hold pending a full investigation of the landlord's practices." James sank into a kitchen chair, overwhelmed. "Are you serious? Those families get to stay." "Not just stay. The rent increases have been ruled invalid. They're going back to their original rates while the case proceeds. And James, the Georgia Attorney General's office is opening an investigation into the landlord's other properties. This could impact hundreds of families across the state." That weekend James drove to Elm Street to see the results for himself. Mrs. Washington was sitting on her front porch when he arrived, and her face broke into a wide smile when she saw him. "There's the young man who started all this," she called out, rising from her rocking chair with some effort. "Come here and let me hug your neck." James climbed the porch steps and found himself enveloped in the kind of embrace that only grandmothers could give, fierce, warm and somehow healing. "Mrs. Washington, I just delayed a delivery. You and David and those lawyers did all the real work. Child, you listened to me." She held him at arm's length, her eyes serious. "You could have walked away, could have just done your job and minded your own business. But you chose to see us as people who mattered. That choice changed everything." Over the next hour, James met 3 of the families who had been facing eviction. There was Carmen Rodriguez, a single mother working 2 jobs to support her elderly mother and teenage son. Robert and Linda Jackson, both in their 70s, who had lived in their small house for 43 years. And Maria Santos, whose husband had recently been laid off from the textile plant.
Each family welcomed James like family, and their gratitude was overwhelming. Carmen insisted on making him coffee while Linda Jackson pressed a plate of homemade cookies into his hands. "My grandson asked me why a stranger would help us," Robert Jackson told James. "I told him that sometimes angels come in work clothes." The comment stayed with James as he drove home to prepare Zara's dinner. Angels in work clothes. He thought about Keisha, how she'd always believed that ordinary people could do extraordinary things just by choosing to care about each other. 3 weeks later, David called with another proposition that would change everything. "James, remember that non-profit we talked about? Well, I've been doing more than just thinking about it." David's excitement was infectious even over the phone. "I've filed the paperwork, secured initial funding and found office space in Columbus. The Henderson Community Justice Center is officially becoming a reality." James felt his heart skip. "David, that's incredible. But are you sure about this? It's a big leap." "I've never been more sure of anything. And James, we want you to be our community outreach coordinator. Full salary, health insurance and most importantly the chance to do this kind of work every day." The offer was everything James had dreamed of but never dared to hope for. It represented security for Zara, meaningful work for himself, and the chance to honor Keisha's memory by helping families in crisis. But it also meant leaving the safety of his current job, taking a risk on something new and uncertain. That evening, as he tucked Zara into bed, James decided to ask for her perspective. "Baby girl, what would you think if Daddy took a new job?" One where I'd help families who are having problems like Tyler's family when their car broke down. Zara considered this with her usual seriousness. Would you still pick me up from school? Every day? Would we still live in our apartment? We might be able to get a nicer place actually. Would I still see Tyler and Sarah and David? James smiled. They're moving to Columbus, remember? You'd probably see them all the time. Zara was quiet for a moment, processing. Then she looked at him with an expression far too wise for her 7 years. Daddy, remember when Mama was sick and you used to cry sometimes? The question caught James off guard. Yes, sweetheart, I remember. You don't cry like that anymore. Not since we helped Tyler's family. She reached over and touched his hand. I think helping people makes you happy. And when you're happy, I'm happy. James felt tears fill his eyes. You think I should take the new job? I think you should do what makes you feel proud of yourself. That's what Mama would say. As James sat there holding his daughter's small hand, he could almost feel Keisha's presence in the room. He remembered her words from the hospital. When the opportunity comes to do something bigger, don't let fear hold you back. You know what, baby girl? I think Mama would be very proud of both of us. 3 months later, the Henderson Community Justice Center held its grand opening. The renovated building on 3rd Avenue, just 3 blocks from where James had first refused to deliver an eviction notice, buzzed with activity. Mrs. Washington, now the center's unofficial community ambassador, cut the ribbon with a pair of oversized scissors. Local news crews captured the moment, but James was more interested in the faces in the crowd, families they'd already helped, community leaders who'd joined their cause, and new volunteers ready to make a difference. Carmen Rodriguez was there with her teenage son who had started volunteering at the center after school. Robert and Linda Jackson had brought homemade cookies for everyone. Maria Santos, whose husband had found new work with the help of the center's job placement program, beamed as she watched her children play in the new playground area. David stood at the podium to address the gathering, his corporate suits replaced by khakis and a polo shirt that made him look younger and more relaxed. 6 months ago I was a corporate lawyer who'd lost sight of why I went to law school in the first place, he began. Today, thanks to a chance encounter and one man's willingness to risk his job for strangers, we're opening a center that will help hundreds of families stay in their homes. He gestured toward James, who stood in the back of the crowd with Zara and Tyler. But this center isn't really about legal services or community organizing. It's about something simpler and more powerful, the recognition that we're all connected, that helping others is really just another way of helping ourselves. The applause was warm and sustained, but James was focused on something else. In the children's play area they'd set up outside, Zara was teaching Tyler and 3 other children how to build with blocks, her patient voice carrying across the crowd. See, if we all work together we can make it tall enough for everyone. Sarah appeared beside James, watching the children with the same smile he knew was on his own face. Look how far we've all come, she said softly. James nodded, thinking about the journey from that hot afternoon at the gas station to this moment of celebration and new beginnings. He thought about Keisha's words about kindness being like a muscle that grows stronger with use. You know what I learned? James said as he watched his daughter and their new extended family. I used to think helping people meant sacrificing something. But every time I chose to help someone I ended up gaining more than I gave. That's the secret, isn't it? Sarah replied. Kindness multiplies. As the celebration carried on around him, the laughter of children echoing through the backyard, the glow of string lights swaying in the evening breeze, James felt his phone buzz in his pocket. He almost ignored it, thinking it was another congratulatory message from a friend or a reminder about tomorrow's errands. But when he pulled it out, he saw an unfamiliar number and a short trembling message. Saw your story in the newspaper. My family is facing eviction and we don't know what to do. Can you help? We have 3 children. James stared at the screen for a long moment, feeling the weight of the words settle into his chest. He could picture them already. 3 small faces looking up at parents who didn't know where to turn. A family standing on the edge of losing everything. It was the same fear he had felt so many times before, the helplessness of watching your security slip through your fingers. But now, unlike before, he wasn't powerless. He smiled softly and typed back, his thumb steady and sure. Come by the center Monday morning. We'll figure it out together.
When he hit send, James leaned back and let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Because the truth was, there would always be another family in crisis, another parent who felt like they were drowning, another child who deserved the chance to sleep in a safe bed and dream without fear. And with every new call, every desperate text, there was another opportunity to choose compassion over convenience. Another chance to be reminded that helping others was really just another way of finding your own way home. Only now James wasn't carrying that responsibility alone. He looked around at the party, their friends, the neighbors, David and Sarah laughing as they passed out slices of cake, Tyler racing across the yard with Zara. What had begun with one impulsive act of kindness in the heat of a gas station parking lot had grown into something so much larger than himself. He was part of a community now, a family not bound by blood alone but by the choice to stand with one another. They all seemed to understand that truth in their bones. We're all walking each other home, and the journey is easier when we help carry each other's burdens. 6 months later, the glow of that evening still lingered, but life had grown busier than ever. On a gray Monday afternoon, James sat at his desk in the modest office of the Community Justice Center. His desk was covered in folders, case files stacked high with notes scribbled in his tidy handwriting. Each folder represented a family, a story, a battle worth fighting. He rubbed his temples, the familiar ache of fatigue tugging at him, when the sound of small footsteps pounding down the hall pulled him back to the present. The door burst open and Zara came flying in, her braids bouncing, her smile wide enough to light the entire room. Right behind her was Tyler, taller now, his grin just as bright. "Daddy," Zara exclaimed, practically out of breath. "Guess what Tyler's mom told us?" James leaned back in his chair, his tiredness fading the way it always did when his daughter's joy filled the room. "What's that, baby girl?" "She said they're having another baby," Zara announced proudly, as if she were delivering breaking news. "And Tyler wants to name it after you." James chuckled, the sound deep and genuine. He reached out and pulled both children into a bear hug, pressing a kiss to Zara's forehead and ruffling Tyler's hair. "Well, now that's quite an honor. I'm not sure the world needs another James, but if it does, I'll take it." Zara giggled, but then her face grew serious in that way only children can manage, sudden and unfiltered. "And Daddy, Tyler asked me if you were my real daddy or my stepdaddy. And I told him you were my heart daddy, the kind that chooses to love you every single day." For a moment James couldn't speak. That familiar tightness filled his chest, the ache of loss that always accompanied thoughts of Keisha. But this time, instead of sorrow, the feeling was pure gratitude, gratitude that Zara understood something so profound, gratitude that she felt so secure in his love, gratitude that the life they had rebuilt together had given her the language to describe it. "That's exactly right, sweetheart," James said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "Heart family is the strongest kind." The two children squeezed him tighter before wriggling free, already eager to return to the play area down the hall where crayons, building blocks and laughter waited. James watched them go, his heart swelling at the sight of Zara's hand slipping naturally into Tyler's, the two of them walking side by side as if it had always been that way. Alone again in his office, James sat back and let the moment wash over him. He thought of Keisha, her voice, her laughter, the way she had looked at him that final week and made him promise to keep choosing kindness, to keep helping even when it hurt, to keep showing their daughter the kind of world she wanted her to believe in. He wished she could see them now. He wished she could see the center they had built, the families they had protected, the chosen family that had blossomed out of grief and chance. A sharp ring cut through the quiet. James reached for the phone, glancing at the number. Another family in need. Another call that couldn't wait. He smiled as he lifted the receiver, his voice steady and welcoming. "Community Justice Center, this is James. How can we help today?" Because this was the work now, the beautiful, exhausting, life-giving work of walking each other home.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.